What would you do if your own son showed up at your door demanding $500,000 by tomorrow or else? I just said okay, but what I did next left everyone speechless. And when they came for the money, all they found was a locked door and a single envelope. What was inside made them scream, "Stay with me, because you won't believe how this ends." So there I was, sitting in my favorite armchair, the one with the faded floral print and the mysterious stain that's been there since 1998, minding my own business. I had just settled in with a fresh cup of chamomile tea and the latest issue of Good Housekeeping, ready to enjoy a rare moment of peace. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes after raising 3 kids and finally getting them out of the house. I was just about to read an article on decluttering your life. Oh, the irony. When the front door banged open so hard I thought the hinges might give out, in storms my son, Logan, looking like he'd just run a marathon in a suit. His tie was askew, his hair sticking up in all directions. And his eyes, well, let's just say I hadn't seen that wild look since the time he tried to build a treehouse with nothing but duct tape and a dream. He didn't even bother with a hello. Instead, he marched right up to me, waving a crumpled piece of paper like it was a winning lottery ticket. "Mom, I need the money tomorrow. No delays," he blurted out, his voice cracking just a little at the end now. Let me pause here and ask, have you ever had someone demand $500,000 from you before you've even had your morning coffee? No. Well, let me tell you, it's a real wake-up call. I blinked at him, trying to process what he'd just said. Money. Tomorrow. No delays. I glanced at the paper in his hand, half expecting it to be a joke. Maybe a prank or one of those fake checks you get in the mail that says you could be a winner. But no, this was real. Very real. He shoved the paper in my face, and I squinted at the numbers. $500,000. $500,000. My heart did a little somersault. Yeah, not the good kind. It's for Aubrey, he said, as if that explained everything. Aubrey, his wife of 3 years, I liked well enough, but who had a knack for getting into trouble that would make Lucy Ricardo look like a saint? She's in a bit of a bind, he added, his voice dropping to a whisper, as if the walls might be listening. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I looked at Logan, my baby, my firstborn, the boy who once cried because he thought the moon was following him home. Now here he was, a grown man, asking his mother to bail him out of a mess that wasn't even his own. I wanted to laugh, or maybe cry, or maybe both. But instead, I just said, okay. Because what else do you say when your son is about to have a meltdown in your living room? I could see the relief wash over his face, like he'd just been handed a life raft in the middle of a stormy sea. But here's the thing. I had a plan. And it didn't involve robbing a bank or selling my collection of vintage Elvis records, no matter how much they might fetch on eBay. I've always believed that when life throws you a curveball, you don't duck, you swing. And sometimes you hit a home run. Other times you get hit in the face. But you always keep your eyes open. Logan started pacing the room, muttering to himself about deadlines and collectors and how they would be coming by tomorrow to pick up the money. I wanted to ask who they were, but I figured it was better not to know. Some things are best left a mystery. Like what really happened to the last piece of chocolate cake in the fridge. He stopped pacing long enough to look at me, his eyes pleading, "Mom, I know it's a lot. But you always know what to do. You always fix things." There, it was the old guilt trip, wrapped up in a compliment. I almost smiled. He was still my little boy, even if he was now a grown man with a mortgage and a wife who apparently owed more money than I'd made in my entire career. I nodded, trying to look calm. "Don't worry, Logan. I'll take care of it." He let out a shaky breath, then hugged me, one of those quick, desperate hugs that says more than words ever could. "Thank you, Mom. You're the best." And with that, he was gone, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a debt notice that felt heavier than a sack of potatoes. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the paper in my hand. $500,000. It was almost laughable. Did he really think I had that kind of money lying around? If I did, I'd be on a beach in Hawaii, not clipping coupons in Ohio. But I wasn't angry. Not really. I was determined. Because if there's one thing I've learned in my 58 years, it's that mothers are made of tougher stuff than anyone realizes. We don't just fix scraped knees and broken hearts, we fix the impossible. So I set my tea aside, stood up, and started making a list. Not of things to buy, but of things to do. Because tomorrow, when they came knocking, I was going to be ready. And they were in for a surprise. That night, the house was quieter than usual. You know the kind of quiet I mean, the kind that settles in your bones and makes you wonder if you're the last person left on earth. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the old wall clock, and the occasional creak of the floorboards as the house settled in for the night. Logan had left hours ago, his gratitude still echoing in my ears, but I knew sleep wouldn't come easy. Not with a $500,000 problem hanging over my head like a storm cloud. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the debt notice, my mind racing. I thought about all the times I'd bailed my kids out of trouble late-night phone calls, broken hearts, fender benders, and even that time Logan tried to make a science project volcano in the living room. But this was a whole new level. I could almost hear my late husband's voice in my head, chuckling. Well, honey, you always said you wanted more excitement in your life. Be careful what you wish for, right? I made myself a cup of chamomile again because if there was ever a night for calming nerves, this was it. I sat there, sipping slowly, letting the warmth seep into my hands, and thought about what to do. I could call the police, but what would I say? Hello, officer. My daughter-in-law owes $500,000 and some mysterious they are coming to collect. I could try to reason with Logan, but I knew he was in over his head. And as much as I loved him, I wasn't about to mortgage my house or drain my retirement for a mess I didn't make. That's when the idea hit me. Not a lightning bolt, but a slow, steady flicker like the pilot light on the old stove. I didn't have the money, but I did have something else. My wits. And after 58 years of raising kids, managing a household, surviving everything from PTA meetings to menopause, I figured I was more than a match for whatever trouble was coming my way. So, while the rest of the world slept, I got to work. I pulled out my old suitcase, the one I hadn't used since that disastrous cruise to the Bahamas where I got seasick before we even left port. I packed light, a few changes of clothes, my toothbrush, a good book, because you never know when you'll have time to read, and most importantly, my passport. I'd always kept it up to date just in case. You never know when you might need to make a quick getaway, though I always imagined it would be for something more glamorous. Like eloping with George Clooney, not dodging debt collectors. I moved quietly through the house, careful not to wake the neighbors or the nosy cat next door, who always seemed to be watching. I double-checked the locks, turned off the lights, and took one last look around. It was strange, leaving like this. I'd lived in that house for over 30 years. Every corner held a memory. The height marks on the doorframe, the dent in the wall from Logan's infamous indoor baseball game, the faded family photos lining the hallway. But I knew I couldn't stay. Not tonight. Before I left, I sat down at the kitchen table and wrote a note. Not a goodbye letter, nothing so dramatic. Just a few lines carefully chosen, meant for whoever came looking for me in the morning. I slipped the note into an envelope and taped it to the front door right at eye level. I smiled to myself, imagining the look on their faces when they found it. Sometimes a little mystery is the best defense. I checked my watch for 15 a.m. The world was still dark, the sky just starting to lighten at the edges. I grabbed my bag, took a deep breath, and stepped outside. The air was crisp, the kind that wakes you up and makes you feel alive. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst right out of my chest. Was I scared? Absolutely. But there's a certain thrill in doing something unexpected, something bold. I'd spent most of my life playing it safe, putting everyone else first. Maybe it was time to shake things up. I drove to the airport with the radio off, my mind buzzing, with 1,000 thoughts. What if Logan called? What if the collectors showed up early? What if I was making a huge mistake? But with every mile, I felt a little lighter, a little braver. I wasn't running away, not really. I was taking control, making my own choices for once. And besides, who says you can't start a new adventure at 58? If Julia Child could learn to cook at 40, I could certainly learn to disappear at 58 at the airport. I bought a one-way ticket to Phoenix. Why Phoenix? No reason. Really. It's far enough to be a challenge, but not so far that I couldn't find my way back if I needed to. Plus, I'd always wanted to see the Grand Canyon. I checked in, went through security, and found a quiet corner. To wait for my flight, I watched the sun rise through the big glass windows, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. As the plane took off, I looked down at the city shrinking below me. I wondered what Logan would think when he found the house empty, the door locked, and the envelope waiting for him. I wondered what Aubrey would say, or if she'd even care. But most of all, I wondered what would happen next. Life is funny that way just when you think you've got it all figured out, it throws you a curveball. But maybe, just maybe, that's when the real adventure begins. The morning sun was barely peeking over the rooftops when Logan and Aubrey pulled up in front of my house, their car screeching to a halt like they were late for the last train out of town. I can only imagine the conversation they'd had on the way over, Logan probably wringing his hands, Aubrey tapping her foot. Both of them convinced that I'd be waiting inside with a neat stack of cash and maybe a plate of my famous lemon bars. After all, wasn't that what mothers were for? To fix everything no matter how impossible. But as they stepped out of the car, the first thing they noticed was the silence. No lights on, no coffee brewing, no familiar figure waving from the window. It's the locked front door and, taped right at eye level, a single white envelope fluttering. In the breeze. Now, let's pause for a second. If you were in their shoes, what would you do? Would you panic, thinking something terrible had happened? Would you call the police, convinced I'd been kidnapped by a roving band of bingo enthusiasts? Or would you do what Logan did, march right up to the door, snatch the envelope, and rip it open, hoping for a miracle? I suppose it's human nature to hope for the best, even when you know deep down that the best is probably too much to ask for. Logan's hands were shaking as he tore open the envelope. Aubrey hovering behind him, her eyes darting nervously up and down the street. Inside, they found a single sheet of paper, folded neatly in half. No check, no cash, no secret map to buried treasure. Just my handwriting, steady and calm, as if I were writing out a grocery list instead of dropping a bombshell. Dear Logan and Aubrey, the note began. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. No, I haven't run off with the pool boy, though, at this point. It's not the worst idea I've ever had. I know you came here expecting a miracle, but sometimes the only miracle is learning to stand on your own 2 feet. I love you both, but I can't fix this for you. It's time for you to face the music. TOGETHERPS. The only thing you'll find in my safe is a half-eaten Snickers bar and a stack of old bingo cards. Good luck. Love, Mom, Janet. For a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that fills a room and presses in on your chest, making it hard to breathe. Then, as the words sank in, Aubrey let out a strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Logan just stared at the note, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. She's gone, he stammered, as if the idea was too much to process. Aubrey, never one to keep her feelings to herself, let out a scream a high. Sharp sound that sent a flock of birds scattering from the neighbor's tree. They stood there, frozen, as the reality of the situation hit them. No money, no rescue, no easy way out. Just the two of them standing on the porch of a locked house, holding a note that might as well have been a ticking time bomb. I can only imagine the thoughts racing through their heads. Panic, fear, maybe even a little anger. After all, wasn't I supposed to be the dependable one? The fixer? The one who always had a solution, no matter how big the problem. But here's the thing. Sometimes, the best thing you can do for the people you love is to let them figure things out for themselves. It's not easy, believe me, I know. Every instinct in my body wanted to swoop in and save the day, to make everything right with a wave of my magic mom wand. But I also knew that if I kept bailing them out, they'd never learn to swim on their own, and as much as it hurt, I had to let them sink or swim this time. Logan tried the door, rattling the handle as if sheer determination might make it open. But I'd locked it tight, and the only key was tucked safely in my purse, somewhere over the Midwest by now. Aubrey started pacing, her heels clicking angrily on the porch, muttering about how this wasn't supposed to happen and what are we going to do now? Logan just stood there, staring at the note, his shoulders slumping as the weight of the situation settled on him. I wish I could have seen their faces just for a moment. Not out of spite, but because I wanted them to understand, really see that sometimes love means stepping back, even when every part of you wants to step in. I hope they'd realize that the real inheritance I was leaving them wasn't money, but a lesson, that they were stronger than they thought, and that they could get through this together. They tried. As the minutes ticked by, the reality of their predicament became clear. There would be no easy fix, no last-minute save. So they'd have to face the collectors, the consequences, and each other. Maybe they'd fight, maybe they'd cry, maybe they'd even blame me for a while. But eventually, I hoped, they'd realize that this was their problem to solve and that they had everything they needed to do it. And as for me, well, I was already halfway to Phoenix, watching the clouds drift by and wondering what adventures awaited me next. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace, a quiet certainty that I'd done the right thing, even if it wasn't the easy thing. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let go. Inside the envelope, as Logan and Aubrey's trembling hands unfolded the single sheet of paper, the truth finally landed with the weight of a grand piano. The note was written in my familiar, looping script, steady, unhurried, as if I'd been writing a recipe for Sunday pot roast instead of dropping a bombshell on my only son and his wife. "Dear family," it began, and I could almost hear the sigh that must have escaped Logan's lips as he read those words. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone. No, I haven't run off with the pool boy. But I have decided to take a little vacation from your drama." I could picture Aubrey's face, her mouth opening and closing like a goldfish, trying to process the idea that I, the ever-reliable, ever-present mother-in-law, had simply left. The rest of the note was short and to the point, just like I'd be intended. Here's a tip. Money can't solve every problem. Sometimes you have to face the music yourselves. I'd underline that last part, just in case they missed the message. P.S. The only thing you'll find in my safe is a half-eaten Snickers bar and a stack of old bingo cards. Good luck. Love, Mom Janet. I could almost hear the echo of their frustration, the disbelief, the way Aubrey's voice would rise, in that high, incredulous pitch she reserved for moments when the universe didn't bend to her will. And Logan, my sweet, stubborn Logan, he'd probably just stand there, silent, the note shaking in his hands. The reality of the situation finally settling in. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But let me tell you, sometimes the old dog is the one with all the tricks. I'd spent my whole life being the fixer, the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over every rough patch and patched every hole. I'd been the glue that held our little family together, the one who always had a plan B and C and D just in case. But this time, I decided to do something different. I decided to let go. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but out of love, the kind of love that knows when to step back and let others find their own way. As Logan and Aubrey stood on the porch, the morning sun creeping higher in the sky, I imagined the neighborhood was just starting to wake up. Mrs. Thompson across the street would be watering her petunias. pretending not to notice the commotion. The mailman would be making his rounds, whistling off-key as he stuffed bills and catalogs into mailboxes. Life, as always, would go on. But for Logan and Aubrey, the world had shifted. The safety net was gone, and for the first time, they'd have to figure out how to land on their own 2 feet. I wondered if they'd try this safe, just to be sure. I could see them rushing inside, flinging open drawers and cabinets, searching for some hidden stash of cash or a secret note with instructions. But all they'd find was exactly what I'd promised, a half-eaten Snickers bar, because who can? Ever finish one in one sitting? And a stack of old bingo cards, each one a reminder of simpler times, when the biggest worry was whether B12 would finally be called. Maybe, just maybe, they'd laugh. Or maybe they'd cry. Or maybe, for the first time, they'd sit down together and really talk about how they'd gotten into this mess and how they were going to get out of it. Meanwhile, I was thousands of feet in the air somewhere between Ohio and Arizona, watching the clouds drift by and feeling lighter than I had in years. I'd always dreamed of seeing the Grand Canyon, of standing on the edge and feeling the wind in my hair, the sun on my face. I'd always put it off, telling myself there would be time later. After the kids were grown, after the bills were paid, after everyone else's needs had been met. But life has a funny way of reminding you that later isn't promised. Sometimes you have to take the leap. Even if you're not sure where you'll land, as the plane touched down in Phoenix, I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. I was alone, yes, but I was also free to make my own choices, to write my own story, to live for myself for once. I checked into a little motel on the edge of town, the kind with faded curtains and a pool that hadn't seen a swimmer in years. I unpacked my bag, hung up my clothes, and sat on the bed, letting the silence settle around me. It was a different kind of quiet than the one I'd left behind, quiet filled with possibility. With hope, with a promise of new beginnings. Back home, I hoped Logan and Aubrey would find their footing. I hoped they'd realize that money wasn't the answer to every problem, that sometimes the only way out is through. I hoped they'd learn to lean on each other, to face their fears together, to grow stronger in the process. And maybe, just maybe, they'd understand that my leaving wasn't an act of abandonment, but an act of faith, a belief that they were capable of more than they ever imagined. As I drifted off to sleep that night, the desert wind rattling the side window, I smiled to myself. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but I'd just pulled off the biggest trick of all. I'd given my family the gift of independence, and I'd given myself the gift of freedom. And as for what comes next, well, that's a story for another day. So, what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have handed over the money, or would you have taken a stand? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this little adventure, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, life after 50 is just getting started, and you won't want to miss what happens next.